Not to go through the CV as somebody tried Milka I was to go through my CV, and keep it very short. We are honored you're with us, and I'm very happy to give you the floor, sir. You have the floor. Dr. Rasool.
Dank u wel, Bert Koenders. Thank you very much to the Max van der Stoelen Foundation for this invitation, for the staff of this foundation who has made it possible for me to come here, and backed up by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs who declared me persona grata by giving me a 2-year visa, and also for Milka for wearing the kind of shoes that matches with my tie and shirt. I suddenly feel quite at home. I want to really greet the leadership of this party, of the parties that are invited here, the members of this emerging progressive alliance that becomes critical in the age in which we live, the growing coherence amongst forces of the left, because the only thing that allows the assertiveness of the right is the incoherence of the left. And therefore, I believe that this is more than a celebration of Afrikadag. Africa Day could become the hub around which our progressive efforts are made, because not only do we need a new economic alliance with Africa, but Africa needs choices. And Africa can't put all its eggs in an American basket. That has proven to be the case, and therefore we must map out a new relationship between Europe, the European Union, and Africa with the entire world. So I am absolutely delighted to be with you for this 30th celebration of Afrikadag here in the Netherlands. I've been asked to speak about Africa in a changing geopolitical world, the new global order that is struggling to be born. And I'm conscious that we live in this era of rising authoritarianism, of populism, of mainstreamed extremism that is not in the mountains of Tora Bora any longer or in the deserts of Raqqa, but occupy seats of power like the White House, has a footprint in parliaments across Europe, that runs a country like Hungary, that wants to be the pretenders to the throne in many other countries, that was pushed back in the Netherlands just a few days ago. And so we are not dealing with a theoretical emergence of authoritarianism. We are dealing with the reality of it. We are not dealing with a theoretical trade war. We are in the midst of it. We are not dealing with a cut of AIDS that within 1 month has left the most vulnerable without any management of their condition. We are dealing with a very real and existential danger in the world. And before you think that this is going to be a pessimistic, faithless, despairing speech, I want to quote someone who, in my studies of German at high school, Bertolt Brecht, when in his play, Galileo, he puts into the mouth of Galileo very important words that we must take as an inspiration here when he says, "Unhappy is the land that needs a hero." Heroism does not emerge from fair weather conditions. The Swedes never win the Nobel Peace Prize. They win other prizes because they're happy. It is in Africa, a country like South Africa, where 4 Nobel Peace Prize winners were emerged because we were unhappy. It is in the places where danger stalks that heroes emerge, because unhappiness and difficulty is the precondition for ease and heroism. And therefore, what we need to do is to find the formula for us collectively, whether African diaspora or whether those in solidarity with Africa, to find the collective will for the heroism that this era requires. And so, this changing geopolitics, this emerging global order that we refer to and that we work for and that we hope for, is ambiguous. It's ambiguous because those that we deem to be the sunset forces, those who are waning, who are on their way out, they appear so aggressive today, so belligerent, even vicious today. And those who must be the sunrise to replace it look bloodied and hesitant, on the back foot. And so, can we really believe that there is a transition in the world when there's this ambiguity? The world today has a belligerent, a pernicious, and a bellicose superpower attacking friend and foe, respecting no historical relations and no global equilibrium that must be maintained. With the allies, historical allies, sitting it out, appeasing, submitting. And the opponents also sitting it out, surviving. It reminds me of my first visit to the Netherlands in 1990, when invited by the Comité Zuidelijke Afrika, KZA, and AABN, the two famous connies, Rupert and Ebrahim, to be part of a delegation that would explain the transition in South Africa, and can they really believe that the apartheid state in South Africa was the sunset state, and that the liberation movement would be the sunrise phenomenon. Because for them, it was so difficult to understand how can the apartheid state be waning and declining when there were more deaths in that period of transition than they could count before. When more people were in prison with the status of emergency, when our townships were under siege, they refused to believe that indeed this transition could be happening, and that the liberation movement had to collect itself from exile, from the prison, from the underground, and from the internal movements. And would they be coherent enough to replace it? That is the movie we saw in 1990 on a national scale about South Africa. And so this journey took me to meet the church leaders in Utrecht, to meet the activists in Amsterdam, to meet even the old bearded guy who fed me Fisherman's Friend and didn't warn me how powerful it could be, and made me cough for the first few minutes because the vapor just overwhelmed me. But he was telling his story about how it was his job to sit at the harbor of Rotterdam to watch every ship that came in, whether it carried South African goods or not. That was the heroism of the Dutch people, the two connies, the movements they led, and the march that I was involved in that time in GroenLinks. That's the first memory I have of the Netherlands and the heroism that I saw in the anti-apartheid movement. And the question they all asked is it too early to relax? And the answer is never relax. Never believe theoretically that the transition is inevitable because the forces who want to stop the transition are desperate forces. They wanted to know what is the new role for an anti-apartheid movement then. And I think the question to the progressives is, what is your role? Because your role has to be the undertakers of the old and the midwives of the new. How do we do that? If you think you are here for Afrikadag, and you think you are here to just weld together different people and different parties, you will be mistaken if you think that that's the simplicity of your task. It is to dirty your hand in digging the grave of the old and to bloody your hands by giving birth to the new. And clearly, the role of Dutch society after its early forays with colonialism has been to say, how can we be good again? How do we atone for what we had done through colonialism? And that is the responsibility that falls on this generation of all ethnicities, all colors, all racial groups, all those religious groups who make up this Dutch society. There is this way to continue what had happened in the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s, and the 1990s, in which you were helping to be the undertakers of apartheid and the birth of the new democracy. And so, again, we see the same pattern, and therefore you should never be disheartened that your governments have not caught up with the consciousness of your citizens. Because in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, your governments may have been happy to work with apartheid South Africa, but your citizens said no. In much the same way we have seen, your governments may be ambiguous about Israel and Palestine, but your citizens said, we don't stand for a genocide. In much the same way that your citizens say, we don't stand for a proxy war in Sudan or anywhere else. And you are the host of the ICJ. You are the first ones to hear the news of the ICJ. And a small country on the southern tip of Africa had the guts that big countries did not have, had the conscience that big countries did not have, to take Israel to the ICJ, because if anyone knows a genocide, if anyone knows apartheid, if anyone knows segregation, if anyone knows oppression, it would be the last people who were colonized on the African continent. And so what are our objectives as progressives in this world? What we do is that we make the world safe for difference and diversity, because that's under attack. We all like it when money is mobile. You can push a button and move R1 million or $1 million. We love it when goods are mobile. We can order now and tomorrow it is delivered at our door. But when people are mobile, we create all isms and phobias to deal with every different people who enters our space. And so we must make the world safe for difference and diversity. We must make the world secure for the poor and the vulnerable, because inequality is out of control. We must make the world free from the bullies and the pernicious. We must make the world a defense of democracy, of human rights, and of freedom, because we cannot sacrifice that at the altar of fighting wokeism. And so our challenges are enormous and our job is hard. And we know from our experience in South Africa that in 1990, the last kicks of the dying horse brings about more destruction before the ease and before the resolution comes. 2025 sees much the same kind of thing as the world grapples to move from the unilateralism of the superpower to a greater multilateralism that the world wants to see born, because we can no longer put all our eggs in one basket. And so the emergence of alternative poles in the world, of alternative lines of decision-making, alternative alliances, alternative coalitions across the world is absolutely crucial. We need a power equity, whether it's in the financial architecture of the World Bank and the IMF, or in the Security Council of the United Nations. But we do so with new leverages, because there is no accident that before the president that shall not be named had a Secretary of State, he had a critical mineral czar in the White House. He understands why it was more important to have the tech barons sit behind him at his inauguration rather than his new cabinet. Because he's defining what the battle of this economic epoch is about. And sometimes we get caught up in the madness of annexing Greenland, taking Canada as the 51st state, the fight with South Africa in Africa, the anger with Zelensky in the White House. And it's clear, his fight with Africa is that we have 30% of the world's critical minerals and rare earth elements. The anger with Zelensky is because he didn't come with a signed offtake agreement of the critical minerals and rare earth elements. The deal on Greenland is because as the ice melts, what's under it? Canada, another source, the agreement with Australia. And so we can go on to say that there is the entertaining madness, but there is the dangerous method in the madness. And therefore, we can laugh, but we must be very serious about what are the leverages in this epoch that we are in of the economic transition. And this kicks off the dying horse has resulted in the de facto closure of the African Growth and Opportunities Act. If you think that it's just that there was a non-renewal, it has already stopped the flow of over 2,000 export products from Africa duty-free to the United States. That is $10 billion worth of GDP. That is 1.3 million jobs in Africa, who has a third of the world's youth at risk. In addition to the removal of it, there is, for example, 50% tariffs on Lesotho, who had to declare a state of emergency in order to prevent the kind of uprisings that could happen from the impact. Madagascar, 47%, closing its textile industry. South Africa, 30%, endangering its automotive industry, its agricultural industry. That's the size of the problem that we are facing. PEPFAR, the AIDS program, the summary funding, ending of that funding. We have to prepare for almost 137,000 AIDS deaths in the next year in sub-Saharan Africa, with a possibility of 700,000 new infections. That's the price that Africa is preparing itself and bracing itself for. The global health cuts from the World Health Organization and the USAID, 86% of that budget is cut. 12 billion is cut from sub-Saharan Africa. And already the projections are that 5.7 million people, once that takes hold as it is taking now, 5.7 million Africans will recede into extreme poverty. Over 2 million deaths may result out of it, part of it, the HIV. The Just Energy Transition funding that has been stopped, that does no longer pay the dues of what was promised at Glen Eagles or at Paris or wherever the case may be. Africa sits, like South Africa, on a mountain of coal, but has chosen to bail the world out by not mining its coal and using its coal and making a transition when it could be burning coal for the next few decades. It chose that and is punished for it. So we're getting preferential loans from countries like Germany. We're getting offers from China. We're getting, hopefully, what is happening in Belém is a commitment to fund the obligations of the world for Africa not to industrialize based on fossil fuels. So we can't be without choice in a matter like this. And therefore, I think we must be able to say, and I end on this, how does South Africa, Africa, and the world respond to this perniciousness? Of course, we are forced to fast-track ourselves on the road to self-sufficiency. We were hoping for greater warning, and we were hoping for a bridge that could get us from where we are to where we need to be, but we are sitting up a creek without a paddle. And so, the obvious scenario that we want to manage this is a scenario of global mutuality, in which we have mutual needs and we supply each other's mutual needs. But most importantly, in mutuality, in that scenario, we exchange the tangible, access to the market, for the intangible, create prosperity at home, and reduce the kind of migration and the global insecurity that may come from having a youth population that is functionally unemployed. But mutuality is no longer there. We don't have the resources of a China to retaliate. And neither can we afford to surrender like other countries. South Africa can't afford to surrender by dropping our case against Israel in the ICJ. We can't afford to surrender by abandoning BRICS, because, as I told the senator, you can't aim the shotgun at our knees and then first tell us to throw away our crutches. We can't repeal our empowerment laws. And we can't admit to you that your lies about a white genocide is the truth. There is a delicious and ironic symmetry between South Africa's charge against Israel for genocide with the charge by the United States against South Africa for a white genocide. There is an irony in the symmetry between charging South Africa with land confiscation and South Africa's charge of land occupation against Israel. These are not accidents. This is not the musings of a fool. This is the method in the madness. And so, where we need to go to, we also don't have the wherewithal for the scenario of appeasement. We'll buy you a jet. Come and build a Trump Tower. Send your children. We can't appease by saying, we'll nominate you for the Nobel Peace Prize. That's the option of appeasement. And therefore, a middle country like South Africa has to find the scenario of contingency. What are our leverages, limited as they are? What insurance policies do we take out? Do we diversify our markets? China, for example, has decided to buy 5 of the fruits that's not going into the USA. It's contingent. How does Europe find mutual contingency between Europe and Africa? And so, my respected comrades and friends, I want to say there is an invitation to you in the scenario of contingency. I want to say that I think this is the time for us to hold our hands. If ever the etymology of the word encourage is relevant, encourage means to give each other mutual courage, not to surrender, not to appease, not even to retaliate, but to work between the two poles of mutuality and contingency. We need to be each other's contingency. I call you out for one more round of fighting, because this is the moment in which you must become the undertakers of the worst of the old and the midwives of the best of the new. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.